Hello all, welcome. My name is James Grigson. Thank you for joining today and thank you for your patience. We had a little issue with internet connection, so thank you very much for your patience. Welcome again to our international guests and guests all over the world and in Australia as well. We had 6 different countries join us last week, which was absolutely fantastic and a welcome addition to our medical webinar. If you haven't seen that, we've put that up onto our YouTube channel, and there's also a link to that in the email that you would have got inviting you to this webinar as well. Today I'm joined by Jack Halley. Jack has worked at a number of different institutes. He's there on camera there at the moment. He has worked as a sports scientist in French Olympic Committee, Australian Institute of Sport, and now has found himself at Fusion Sport, works with a number of our NSOs, including the AFL and New Zealand Rugby, QAS as well, and has worked integrally in the development of a lot of IDPs, which is what we're covering today. Ultimately, with IDPs or IPPs, what we have really boiled these down to, and the trends that we've seen across different clients and users, is they're essentially either A, a reviewing tool, or B, a previewing tool for goals. So if I can speak on a reviewing tool perspective, if Jack just scrolls down a little bit, you know, in this example, we're seeing a soccer or a football IPP, and the information at the top of this IPP is very much related to reviewing previous game information. We can see results, stats, and we'll explore that in a little bit more detail shortly. If in an Olympic cycle, we see a lot of people reviewing previous games. In other environments, it might be like the performing arts, whether they made certain performing arts positions and were able to achieve different roles. Really, this review can be done in either reviewing the last week or reviewing the last year, but it's an integral part of what we see in these IPPs or IDPs as a review functionality. If Jack scrolls down a little bit further, we'll see a almost like a preview or a goal setting element to this IPP. So that's one of the next big pieces or the big pillars to what we see in IDPs or IPPs is a preview. It's a real succinct, okay, you have goals, but how are we going to get there and how are we tracking towards these goals? So ultimately, good IPPs will have either one or the other or a combination of both. In our experience, we'll be able to see, some clients like to have a really nice comprehensive review dashboard or review form, or some clients really like to look at or separate it and have their goal setting in one big dashboard, or like this one that we're going to go through today as an example, we've got it all together. We can see the preview information and we can see the goal setting information. Just as a bit of housekeeping, we know there's a lot of different people on the calls and they have a number of different roles in the organizations. We've really tailored this presentation to be able to speak to the people that are designing and putting together these IDPs. Often these IDPs are for stakeholders who don't need too much complexity in terms of advanced data sets. And I say that with respect. People, even these IDPs go to athletes. They don't need to be overloaded with a lot of complex graphs, calculations, things like that. It needs to be quite simple, succinct, and well put together. So we're speaking to those people today because often they're the people that have to put together these IDPs to go to the athletes or to go to the coaches or to go to other stakeholders who aren't in the nitty-gritty, aren't in the day-to-day, and need to have a very simplistic view of these IDPs. So we've put together this presentation in the mindset that we're speaking to those people that are creating these. And we're also going to show some examples of what the actual coaches would go through. So how they would interact and how they would go about filling out some of these game reviews. We'll have an example today of what an athlete would see when they go through and they do a game review. So we're trying to push, from our perspective, we didn't want to overcomplicate it. We could talk from many different angles about how people put together and perceive IDPs, but we just wanted to speak from those lenses. So I just want to preface this presentation with that today. There is a chat functionality and Q&A functionality either at the bottom of your computer or the right-hand side of your computer if you're new to Zoom. And we'll be taking questions at the end. Feel free to write them in as we're talking, and I'll just bank them and use them at the end of the presentation. And also for people that haven't joined us on these webinars, if you have are very similar, if you're a current client, to our human performance summits. We don't go deep, dark and into the back end and into the builder with these presentations. We keep them quite surface level and user based. So don't expect too much builder interaction today. We often leave that to our education team to get into that. This is just very much like our human performance summit. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Jack to begin. Jack, just unmute yourself there, mate.
Cool. Have you got me there, James?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, great. Yeah, first of all, thanks everyone for tuning in today, and thank you, James, for the intro. Just want to sort of continue on from what James has said there, and point out that, yeah, we're not going to dive too deep into how these dashboards are put together or what's happening on the back end in terms of building these forms, but I do want to give a little bit of information around what I consider to be the best practice in pulling these dashboards together and what needs to be put in there. So following on from that, I just want to cover off on a few really key points that I think, through my experience of working with other clients, is really essential to having an effective IPP or IDP. And the first one of those is to really keep information succinct. We don't want to have too much information being put into the dashboard. We want something that's going to foster evidence-based decision-making, and it's going to create conversations from staff members to athletes and within different staff teams at an organization or at a club. We want something that is going to collate multiple pieces of information together. So we don't want a user to have to navigate between multiple different event forms or different sources, other hardwares or softwares, to try and find all of the necessary information they need to review an athlete's performance. We want everything coming into a single location and keep things nice and streamlined. Also on that note, we want something that is accessible to multiple different users. So we want our nutritionists to be able to enter information into their relevant event forms and have that feed through into the dashboard. We want information from various integrations that you might have set up feeding through into one location. And we want that dashboard to be accessible to multiple different teams, and that can be taken care of in the back end through admin roles and permissions. And lastly, we want something that's automated, and this sort of ties into not having to go to all of these different locations to pull information together. We want a report that can be brought up on a Monday after a weekend, where an athlete and a coach can sit down and run through all of the information, or a teacher and a student can sit down and review grades over a term, things like that. So going from there, I'll just run through some of the components of the dashboard that we have here. So starting at the top with the athlete details, again, this is something that is really succinct. We want a quick overview of the latest information relating to our athlete. If you're a coach or a staff member at a really big organization with multiple different athletes or multiple different sports within an organization, you're not necessarily going to know the latest information about an athlete. Someone might have incurred an injury on the weekend. You might not even know about that yet, because you work at an organization with 500 plus athletes. So if you're able to come into a dashboard like this, see the latest information on all of your athletes just as a really succinct summary, then that's a really great start. We have this athlete selector box here at the top. This will mean that dependent on who we select here, the dashboard will actually populate out with that athlete's information. This is a really great way to keep a nice, tidy report. We only have that particular athlete's information up at one time. We don't have to have multiple different areas with all of the other athletes' information. It's nice and succinct. So if we look at the playing status here, this is a really great example of pulling information in from different data sources. So this injury status here, this has probably been entered by a medical or a physiotherapy user. They've entered that into their relevant event form, and now that's pulling through into our dashboard. So we don't have to navigate elsewhere to find that information. It's pulling into one central location. The same can be said for this wellbeing rating here. So this information is actually pulling from an integration that we have with the Apple Health Kit. So this is part of our automated reporting setup. We don't have to manually copy and paste this information from an external hardware or software. This is directly linking into Smartabase and then populating into our dashboard. So overall at the top, athlete details, nice, simple, succinct section, the latest information regarding our athlete. We can then scroll down to our performance review section. So in my opinion, just having worked with a lot of AFL, NRL cricket clients, when we pull match information in, we want that to be succinct as well. We don't need to have a massive history of information straight in front of our eyes as soon as we open the dashboard. We want to set up where we can have the most important information from our most recent performance, or maybe just the last 2 or 3. And then through the use of drop downs and filters, we can actually cycle back through previous rounds information to get that information if we need it. Again, with the match statistics that we pull through here, in this case, this has just been manually entered, but depending on the sport that you play and the integrations that we have available, that might be something that can be an automated process that can just link directly into Smartabase from your external third-party tech. Another really important feature of IPPs and IDPs, in my opinion, is the ability to have some sort of comparison, whether that be between an athlete's perspective and a coach's, or comparing an athlete against other members of their squad, other athletes that play in the same position. So with this setup that we have here in our example, a coach has gone and rated an athlete on these 5 pillars of their performance from the weekend's game. Within our event form, the athlete has the ability to do the same thing, as well as give their comments on their own performance. And we can use this historic table here to actually track back through some of the coaches' reviews on those pillars through previous rounds. And we can see that in this visualization here through this historic time series widget of those ratings over the last 5 rounds. So it's not too much information, but it's succinct enough that we can get an idea as to some of these trends over time. And we can see that quite often the coaches' ratings are slightly higher than the athletes, and that information then begins to tell us a story. One of the other great features of working with dashboards like this and working within Smartabase is the fact that as athletes in the modern era, we understand that the majority of the time they are mobile focused, they are mobile centric. They're not spending as much time on laptops to enter information. They always have their mobile by hand, and they're able to enter information through our application. So we have one example here of the athlete that we have in focus, Aiden Thomas. So he's entered information through the app. He's brought up the player review from the weekend. This form might already be populated out with some information from the coach who has entered match information, etc. The athlete can then go down through the event form, through all of the sliders, put their self ratings in. At the bottom, they can then enter their comments, whatever that might be relating to their performance on the weekend. And then once they save and close that information not only populates in that player review form, but can go directly into our dashboard. And we can see that in our end product in the dashboard itself. And the final note on that, just in terms of comparisons between coach and athlete, like I said earlier, we have the ability to pull through information in this dashboard relating to other athletes as well. So although we've selected a particular single athlete at the top of this dashboard, we can still have some widgets populate with athletes who are also loaded within the squad that we have. So if we look in the top right corner of this particular dashboard, this green box here indicates the group that I currently have selected. So I can pull information through from all of the athletes in that group into this dashboard if I wish to. And looking at this radar plot here in terms of ratings against our athletes, I'm able to use this to then compare an individual athlete, the one I have selected at the top, against the rest of the group. Now that group might be all of the other teammates, or like I said, it could be everyone else that plays the same position or the same age. We have the ability to customize that in the back end in the dashboard builder. And on that note, I'm going to pass back to James, and James is going to run through a few more IDPs specific to AFL.
Yeah, so a couple of years ago at our Human Performance Summit, we had the AFL present. Jack, do you mind just going full screen on that for me, mate? And flick to 2217. So the AFL presented their IDPs at this conference, and I'm more than happy to share this link through. One of the key points that Jack has been bringing up is the comparison with other athletes, and being able to either, if it was that coach rating game review example, it's comparing what the player thought of their performance versus what the coach thought of their performance, and having that comparison as a key part of IDPs. This IDP is an example of their AFL combine. So they do physical tests across a number of days, which look at basic body composition, speed, agility, strength, and a couple of other elements. But what this dashboard here is doing is displaying the athlete as the blue dot. If Jack can cursor over that and just almost show where these blue dots are on this. I know some people might be visually challenged. The blue dots there indicate the player, and those ranges are based off of the performances from every single other person that participated in that combine that is the same position as the athlete that was selected. So for example, I'm a tall forward / ruck. We can see that filter in the top left-hand corner if Jack wants to cursor over that as well. I'm a tall forward, I'm a ruck. I'm looking at my IDP. I can see that I'm sitting, represented as the blue dot, and I can see where I fit in the interquartile ranges based on the data that's been pulled in from the other tall forwards and rucks in this organization. So just to Jack's point, one of his key points here on IDPs in terms of comparison, this is a really nice way to compare an individual's performance to a positional group or a specific group, and their performance as well. Just on another example of a nice review, Jack, can you go to 2537? What they've done here, and again, it's going to be different strokes for different folks, and what your sport is going to obviously depend on how you're going to put together this dashboard and how you're going to review different tournaments or periods of time. But this is a review of their national championships. They play about 4 or 5 games across 7 days. What we can see here is their review of that mini tournament. We can see reference at the top, obviously to the person and their key details. But as we come down, we see some statistics, averages across that competition. If Jack wants to cursor over that as well, we can see the statistics coming in from an integration for AFL. We can then see GPS information, so their distances covered across that championship for load monitoring. And then we begin to look at some of the subjective information from the coach. So what the coach has said about their performance across the championship, how they rate technical, tactical, physical, and a summary of all that there. And of course, and almost leading into and segueing into our next piece, there's the strengths and room for improvements and additional comments. Again, a subjective rating, which then in a lot of people's workflows, what they'll do is they'll have this as the review information. They'll look at something like what we have at the bottom of this dashboard, which shows where the coach thinks this player has a need or a room for improvement. And then they'll go into the goal setting part of IDPs, which Jack's just going to take us through now. So taking a look at what this player needs to work on, and now let's put in a real clear action as to how they can get to that goal.
Great, thanks, James. So just jumping back to this one here, like James said, looking at action plans for athletes, being able to set goals, set review dates, make plans to execute on those goals and move forward and make progress. So with the setup that we have in this particular example, we've looked to break our goals down into 4 key pillars: lifestyle, nutrition, physical, and technical, tactical. So sort of touching back on a point that I mentioned at the top, we want a setup that is accessible to multiple different users, to staff from multiple different departments. So in this particular example, we might have a situation where an S&C coach is able to enter these goals with their athlete through an S&C based form that they have permission to. A nutritionist might be able to sit down and enter their nutrition goals with an athlete. It doesn't require all parties working through the same form or having to get together to enter that information together. Everyone can do that separately, do that in their own time, with or without the athlete, whatever the setup is dependent on the organization that you work with, and then have all of that information pull through into a central source like this dashboard. So we'll just quickly go through the data entry process for setting goals like this. We have a really simple form here where we're able to just select our planning date, select the pillar that we want to add information in for. We can just quickly add some goals in here, and we can set a review date to state when we want to catch up on that goal and have a chat about the progress of that. So that's a really streamlined process. That's a really simple example. If your organization has different pillars to work with or has different goals, they have different ideas about when they want to set up dates or review things. The beauty of Smartabase is that it's completely customizable. All you have to do is reach out to your sports science consultant, and then they can make those changes for you.
just before you wrap up there and summarize, Jack, a key part to that workflow and what we see a lot of clients doing is obviously when you've got other different departments collaborating on a similar project, you may have some apprehension from those departments around data privacy and data sharing. I know a lot of our current workflows with current clients will have a very clear indication on the data entry form that this information is going to be shared across department. So, as an example, I'm a coach looking at this dashboard here. Certain medical personnel or nutritionists or sports scientists may not want to share particular pieces of information with the coach. So designing their data entry process and their journey as they're filling out that information and being very clear on, okay, this information is going to stay internal to your department and this is the information that's going to be shared is critical, because then the information that is outlined that is going to be shared, obviously your people in your departments have the trust that that's the information that's going to be pushed to a dashboard such as this, which is going to go to many different stakeholders. So that's a critical part to the data entry, is making sure that it's a very clear what information is going to stay within the department and what information is then going to be pushed out to for wider use.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that sort of leads nicely into my key points that I just want to reiterate again. And one of those being accessibility. We only need to give access to certain users and certain staff from certain departments to particular forms. And if we're clever in the way that we set those forms up in the first place before building these dashboards, and we can make sure that certain parties only see the information that they need to see and not everything. So accessibility, really important. Who has access to what? We want a report that is automated. We want the ability to be able to easily print this report. So if I quickly just navigate through here and go to the print settings, you can see straight away that we have a nice 2-page succinct report that we can just fire off. We can print that out as need be. So it's an automated report. It's there to go. We can give whoever we need to have access to that, either through online, or we can print that out and give them hard copies. This setup has the ability to collate information from multiple different sources within our Smartabase system, including integrations. And finally, the key to an effective IPP and IDPs is to keep it really succinct, have a brief overview, and make clever use of filters and different widgets to link through to further in-depth information as needed.
Awesome, team. So we're just going to throw it to the chat functionality. We've got chats, we've got Q&As open. Feel free to use any of those. We've got a question come in from Cameron Ross, if we'll be able to supply screenshots. Yes. So Cameron, can you just clarify the screenshots that you need? We can give you access to this as a login, the one that Jack's on, as a demonstration login. You can feel free to jump in. We have a site for clients and people that are interested to jump in and have a play. Were you referring to that, or were you referring to the AFL dashboard? Yeah, awesome. Okay, no worries, mate. We can sort that out for you. Any other questions coming through? Please feel free to use the chat functionality. I know it takes a little while for people to type, so if you prefer to speak, I think you can use the raise hand function. Raise hand, you'll be able to speak through. Okay, if any of them pop up, I'll see to them. But thank you again, everyone, for joining. It's our third one in a row. Next week, we'll be looking at physical and cognitive testing inside of Smartabase. A little bit more of a military spin to this one. So if you're interested in how those workflows go out, we're more than happy to. Please join us, and we'll be happy to talk you through that. We'll put the recording out for this presentation via email. We'll also have a survey. We'd love to hear your feedback. Just as I've said those pieces, Lizzie Chapman has asked Jack, the use of Apple Health Kit. Can we explain what comes through from that app?
Yeah, I can definitely reach out to you afterwards, Lizzie, and just go through that. But it's essentially anything that is currently gathered through Apple Health Kit. So as an integration itself, sitting within your Apple device, it is actually linking through from multiple other third-party tech as well. So it's quite an extensive list. So I can definitely reach out to you after this chat, and we can go through everything there.
Yeah, just a commentary on that. A lot of people, Lizzie, are using that for sleep first and foremost. But of course, activity and heart rate and elements like that are also being used quite a lot. Okay, all. If there's no other questions coming through, we might wrap it up here. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you here next week, 2 p.m. same time, Australian Eastern Standard Time, for physical and cognitive testing. Thank you very much.